practice going through some positional drills, it appeared. I don't know how exactly football specific exercise is differentiated from football drills and the return to play protocol, but that tells us that Trey Hendrickson is at least in phase 3, if not, I think more likely phase 4 of the return to play, and phase 5 being the last phase. He's on his way back, and it sounds like Zach Taylor is optimistic that he is going to continue working his way through that protocol in a positive fashion.
Yeah, it's great news. Great news, great news, great news. It's the best news you could have gotten on a Tuesday. I would say, unless they were going to, well, no, yeah, it's the best news realistically. I was going to say, throw some super hypothetical thing out there that was impossible. So yeah, Trey Hendrickson, it feels like he's on track now, knock on wood, to play on Saturday against the Titans. And obviously we'll keep you up to date throughout the rest of the week there. And then Josh Tupou was limited on Tuesday, which is really good news because, well, Larry Ogunjobi, we know, out for the year, going to have surgery later this week, wheeled himself out to practice, was in a boot, going to have surgery on that foot. So that stinks, but it is good to see that Tupou's back out there, and hopefully he can go, because if he can, I'm not saying that the defensive line isn't a concern because you want Ogunjobi out there, of course, but you can still have that rotation a bit against this crazy front that we're going to talk about, and really crazy animal and Derrick Henry that I saw practice clips of on Tuesday. The dude looks ready to go, and I would never want to tackle that man.
Yeah, maybe there's some vague hope that the fitness level isn't at its peak with the injury that he's been dealing with,
Ugh.
but I'm not
Ugh.
counting on that. The other minor
Uh-uh.
injury note is Stanley Morgan returned, or continues, I think, to practice on a limited
Yep.
basis. I think he was practicing last week on a limited basis as well, as he's dealing with a hamstring injury. But the Trey Hendrickson impact, certainly the most important, the best pass rusher on this team by a long shot, especially without Larry Ogunjobi, and they'll miss Ogunjobi's ability to penetrate, but getting Josh Tupou back just for that defensive line rotation, James, as you mentioned, is important. There's also a new face on the practice squad, is Doug Costin, who spent his rookie year in 2020 with the Jaguars as an undrafted free agent, actually played a bunch, more of a 3-tech than a nose tackle type. So kind of doing the same sort of idea as Larry Ogunjobi, played over 400 snaps for the Jaguars in 2020. So he does come with a lot of regular season experience, but we'll see if we see him. Last note before we bring Mike in is Xavier Su'a-Filo was released by the Cincinnati Bengals on Tuesday. He was back off the IR, but when they activated him, I said at the time that I was skeptical that he would be active for any games in the postseason, barring injury. And instead, the Bengals just decided to release him, give him a chance potentially to latch on elsewhere. But there wasn't really a path for him to be active on game days. Now, let's bring in Mike James and talk a little bit more about this Tennessee Titans matchup coming up on Saturday. We talked to Joe Goodberry about it yesterday. And Mike, welcome to the show. Let's start, as we often do, with Joe Burrow and this Bengals passing offense. We're going to hit on the passing offense and the matchup against the defense. The Titans, a good defense this year, at least hypothetically. We'll talk with Mike about whether that's really the case or not, and what kind of challenges they present, because they are an NFL defense at the very least. We'll also talk about the idea, this dream of slowing down Derrick Henry, or what might help the Bengals defensively with a man like Derrick Henry running against them in January when he's been an absolute monster. And we're going to come back to what's wrong with the running game and whether there's hope for that to get back on track here against Tennessee. But Mike, let's start with what Tennessee likes to do on defense. We've seen in recent weeks for Joe Burrow a cover 3 scheme from Gus Bradley where they're going to rush 4 all day. And then we've seen the exotic blitzes in fronts and more aggressive man kind of single high stuff from Kansas City and Baltimore. I got the impression from Kansas City that they do a little bit of everything. They're a little bit more varied, but we're at least at some point this season running a lot of man. What were your takeaways when you checked out what they're doing on defense?
Yeah, I definitely varied. Similar to the Bengals in that retrospect, where they play cover 1, cover 3 about the same rate. So they throw in quarters, the infamous cover 6, whether or not it exists, and they play some Tampa 2 as well. They do some fun stuff with that, but everything. Anything you name, just name a number and cover in front of it, and they probably play it. But they do base a little bit more out of single high than anything else. When they get to obvious pass downs, like the Bengals, they like to get into some too high stuff and prevent explosive plays. But it seems like a game where, for coverage wise, you want Joe Burrow to be able to. It would be awesome at home because he could try to pull them out of their shell and show what they're doing with hard counts and trying to utilize the snap count to his advantage. But on the road, he probably doesn't get that advantage, provided that Tennessee fans show up for the game and it's not all Bengals fans. um, but yeah, it's just about everything. So I mean, there's weak points on the defense, and I think that the cornerbacks, again, just because the Bengals wide receivers are so good, are going to be seconds. Then if they're isolated up, I think Chase and Higgins are better.
Yeah, I think they have the advantage there too, and they should probably have the advantage, right? Their receivers versus opposing secondaries. Hopefully, throughout the playoffs, if they, over the next 3 games, if they make it that far, what do you think the Titans are going to do to Jamar Chase? Do you think they'll double him or cloud him? You know what I'm saying by that, and or do you think they go the T route and try to go that way? Because we've seen teams do different things to these receivers, and obviously the Bengals can beat you with a multitude of different weapons.
With the way they like to play, I don't know if I would expect them to do anything crazy for Jamar Chase. I think they'll play more too high than normal, especially on base downs, just so they have a guy over the top always. But I don't think they're gonna just play something like the Patriots used to with like one double number, I guess one.
Wow.
Things like that. I think they'll try to play their normal coverages, and I mean they could get burned by it. But I just, with the way they like to play, I'm not sure if they're willing to commit that many resources to one player.
And we've seen, generally speaking, opposing defenses do what they do. It takes a pretty special kind of thing. Like we saw Devontae Adams, often a veteran, is what dictates defensive coordinators changing their stripes to some degree. But for the most part, it seems like coaches like to do what they do. They do what they're good at. They do what's installed. They do what their players know. That said, the Tennessee Titans have had a little bit of extra time to prepare and probably could have anticipated facing the Cincinnati Bengals to some degree. So perhaps they've gotten a little bit of extra work in, but the other part of this game, obviously, for the passing offense is the defensive front for the Titans. And Jeffrey Simmons, obviously very good. Harold Landry's been very productive, and Denitro Autry has been pretty good too. What is it that the Titans like to do? Because it seems like some of these guys are maybe getting schemes some pressure up. Is that the case when you watched?
Yes, I think that Danico Autry and Jeffrey Simmons are both monsters. I think Harold Landry's season, not saying he's a bad player, but I do think he's more like a Sam Hubbard than a Trey Hendrickson. He's kind of getting some of these sacks and stuff schemed up. And I mean, I don't usually go in here with stats, but Brandon Thorne, who does Trench Warfare Substack, he rates sacks called True Sack Rate, and only 3 out of the 14 sacks for Harold Landry were listed as high quality, and then there were 8 low quality, and then the rest were coverage. So you could see that he can win, but for the most part, he's kind of getting schemed up a lot by some stunts because Autry and Simmons are they're really good at penetrating on stunts to free him up. And I think that's the scary part with how the right side of the offensive line handled stunts in the Raiders game.